Last night on my live, I talked about how the way the black community is socialized, one gender is actually socialized to see itself as superior to another. And contrary to popular stereotype, I'm not talking about men and boys. But there are some facets of that aspect of the community that have actually gone further than superiority. They've gone into celebrating having very little relationship with men and boys at all. What's good, y'all? Hope everybody's well. Welcome back to the Onyx Report, Black Masculinist News. And today, we're going to be covering a subject that I thought was pretty interesting. Sent to me by a good colleague that I want to briefly shout out. And he knew this would be something that would get me, and he was right. So, trying to get my little computer acting right. Here we go. Shout out to Professor Smith. Hope you're well. Sent me a very interesting piece, and it is entitled, well, why don't I just go ahead and let you look at it with me? Strategic Singlehood of Black Women. This is authored by Bella DePaulo, PhD, and the subtitle reads, Defying Stereotypes, Single Life for Black Women is Often Purposeful and Free. Published January 19th, 2022. It reads, the number and proportion of people living single has been on the rise for decades, both in the U.S. and around the world. In the U.S., the proportion of Black women who are not married is higher than for Latinx, white, or Asian American women. If you were to guess why so many Black women in the U.S. were not married, what would you say? If you pointed to rates of incarceration and mortality for Black men, or if you said that Black women earn more college degrees than Black men, you'd be citing the kinds of factors that most often get discussed by social science researchers and opinion writers. And those factors are not irrelevant, but they leave out something important. What Wayne State University Assistant Professor Jessica D. Moorman describes as Black women's agency in their single status. Black women are not just pushed by external forces, sometimes they choose to be single. Even if they want to marry eventually, these women often lead a purposeful single life in which they pursue goals that are important to them. Let me enlarge this one a little bit. Now, this one is interesting, right? This particular sentence. Dr. Moorman conducted in-depth interviews with 24 Black women from Detroit. 24. Interesting. Ages 25 to 46 who either had never married, 17 of them, were divorced, 6 of them, or were widowed, 1. 7 had children, and another 12 were actively involved in children's lives. All were cisgender and heterosexual. None were cohabiting with a romantic partner. So not only did she only interview 24 women as far as this is concerned, but 23 of them have actually actively made decisions to not associate. They're either not married or divorced. Right? They've actually made decisions to disassociate from men. Only 1 was disassociated on terms that we assume she couldn't control, meaning hopefully she didn't do him in, but as long as she didn't, that's the only one. The findings were reported in Socializing Singlehood, Personal, Interpersonal, and Sociological Factors Shaping Black Women's Single Lives in Psychology of Women Quarterly. Singlehood on their own terms. For many of the Black women Moorman interviewed, their single lives were intentional and beneficial. Interesting. Singlehood is in and of itself a strategy for managing one's broader life goals and responsibilities, one that afforded participants more control over their time, resources, and relationships to men. Moorman called that strategic singlehood, or the intentional practice of enacting or maintaining one's single status for the purposes of growth, safety, or exploration. So this is what I was saying earlier. You actually have a celebration of disassociation from Black men. That's really what this is. It's an acknowledgement of this kind of status of being singlehood as some type of social good. Right? And it's interesting. especially when you again, socialize in a community that really downplays the value of men in and of itself. Now you actually have academics celebrating the disassociation. And we already have record disassociation rates in terms of marriage. So now it's being celebrated. But let's continue. Some of the women did express frustrations with their single lives. They wanted more opportunities for companionship or for sexual expression. They worried about staying single if they wanted to marry. They also recognized that people who marry are rewarded with substantial social and economic benefits just for being married. Even the single women who liked being single were unhappy about that singleism. Singleism. That's interesting. That's one you might want to look up and explore on your own, as far as that being a very concept laid out here. But what I find interesting in this paragraph, right, is that when they begin to define what they are missing out with, as the first sentence says, what they're frustrated with in regard to relationships with men, what they point out as missing highlights for you how men are seen. And it goes back to our previous discussions about male relationship emotional labor, because when you hear what they're asking for or how they perceive men, it's what's not being said that can highlight to you how you're seen, right? What they point out here is companionship, sex, and social and economic benefits. Right? That's what men are good for. Hang around at my whim, provide sex at my whim, and of course, make sure that there's money and economic resources available if something happens. One of the other points they mentioned is that some worried about staying single if they wanted to marry. Right? Whether or not this singlehood that's being celebrated can actually be a deterrent for some men later when women want to settle down and marry. And I think it can be. Doesn't have to be, but it can be. Right? Especially if men want to have families earlier. It can be a problem if you have someone who's celebrating their single life a little too long. But let's continue. Purpose-driven single lives. Single lives were often lives of freedom and security. The women appreciated the opportunities of singlehood offered them to pursue adventures and explorations, to enjoy life at their own pace and for their own reasons, and to sidestep gendered responsibilities that eat up time, money, and autonomy. That's a trip. Gendered responsibility that eat up time, money, and autonomy. And yet, at this very same time, during the same time period, when women are celebrating singlehood, men are still socially expected to build themselves up so that when women are prepared and ready to be married, he's at a place in life where he can support her whims, wishes, plans, goals, whatever. In other words, while she's celebrating avoiding things that eat up time, money, and autonomy, it is a social expectation that you be building yourself up so that when you are picked, when you're finally taken off the shelf, when she has decided to settle down, you are prepared to provide her the reality that she wants to live, while she avoids the responsibilities that eat up time, money, and autonomy. By living single, as it reads, the women felt that they were also more likely to be safe from violence and instability, and spared problems with money, lying, problematic management of the home, and emotional inconsistency. They were not saying that all romantic partners pose those risks, but that by living single, they were more likely to be safe from those risks. That's a trip. By living single, the women felt they were also more likely to be safe from violence and instability. Again, this is how you're seen as men. Even though the rates of abuse are bidirectional in the Black community, we talked about intimate partner violence. They are bidirectional. They are fairly equal from men to women and women to men. Women have been socialized into this narrative that they're abused to such a great degree that one of the first things these women are concerned about when it comes to cohabitating with a man and or a husband more particularly is violence and instability, when she's just as capable of bringing it. Other stats show that women initiate violence more and use weapons to a greater degree, but somehow her first concern is the violence coming from men and only the violence coming from men. Right? Okay, so let's continue. The other part they're worried about are problems with money, lying, problematic management of the home. So money, of course, one of the top things that's expected of men. Lying, basically lying tends to be tied in the vernacular to infidelity. Right? That's the basic assumption, even though when you look at the statistics around infidelity, women only come in a few points less than men. They're really not that far apart. I think it's only like 8 points, something, or 4 points, something of that nature. But it's not a whole significant difference between men's capacity to cheat and women's capacity. They're very similar. And most of those are actually based off of interviews, based off of surveys. So how honest people are, it's a worthy question, right? But from what we gather, rates of infidelity aren't wholly different between men and women. But I think the popular culture has kind of settled on this idea that men are primarily inconsistent and incapable of valuing family to such a degree that that needs to be a primary concern, even though women aren't cheating in any significant way, different than men. But that's not part of the discussion, right? Problematic management of the home. Wow. Okay. And more than anything, emotional inconsistency. Now, I say more than anything because I tie this to really an expectation of emotional labor. But this is termed inconsistency and basically that's key. That's code for when you don't do what she requires of you, what she expects of you. Rather than there being a clear-cut communication about the emotional needs of each person, often what tends to happen is there's a set of expectations that women have as far as having their emotional needs met, and really no sense whatsoever that they need to provide any type of emotional service for men. We're not even socialized to, even men themselves as boys aren't socialized to expect any emotional support from women or any emotional service in any kind of way, or what I term emotional labor. We don't hear that. There's not even a social expectation for that. Men, there's a social expectation, but we're not trained to do it. And even in relationships, we don't hear a clear-cut narrative or explanation of what that individual woman needs. And even if you do, 9 times out of 10, she's not prepared to reciprocate because she's not been taught to think of men as having emotional needs that she needs to meet. And most men haven't been taught to expect that from women. So there's a lot of miscommunication happening in regard to that. It continues. The lives of single Black women were purposeful ones. They devoted the time they spent single to the pursuit of important life goals. So now we're going to hear what these women are pointing to as more important than coupling up, right? Number one, education. Right? Number 2, travel. Number 3, employment and entrepreneurship. Number 4, financial planning, money management, and property ownership. Number 5, emotional growth and self-discovery. Number 6, spiritual growth. Number 7, community involvement. So this means you have 7 different things that are being prioritized over relationships. Let me ask you a question. When you meet a woman who's spent years celebrating singlehood and prioritizing these 7 points, how seriously do you think relationship is considered? In other words, when you meet women like this, how seriously do they take relationships when they've spent years, sometimes even decades, prioritizing at least these 7 things? How seriously does relationship rank? Even when she's trying to be in one, does she know and do we know how to take relationships seriously if women are socialized to seek out these 7 things before they quote unquote settle down, and men are socialized to wait until she picks you off the good man tree? Do we know how to conduct relationships in meaningful ways? Interesting. I tend to think not. It's kind of like this. If you've never been athletic, it's not been a part of your daily makeup, whether, you weren't in the military, you didn't play sports, you were just never particularly athletic. And then one day you decide that you want to get in shape and stay in shape and you want to be athletic. Does it come as easily for you as somebody that's been athletic most of their lives, somebody that's raised in a context to appreciate the importance of daily and regular exercise? Does it come as easily? Do you implicitly prioritize exercise to the same degree if you were raised to appreciate it? Not really. Now, that's not to say you can't work your way up to that, but that's a much harder road than if you're actually raised to appreciate it. I think the same thing is happening here when it comes to actually how to be in a relationship, how to relate to someone. How seriously are you going to take someone that for you is at least eighth level priority in your life? And we haven't even talked about her other, other kids, other relationships. In other words, you might be in 10th place with a woman like this. How does that affect your relationship? How does that affect her willingness to engage you on the same, or at least on as much an important, term as what she wants from you? Because she doesn't want you to prioritize 7 to 10 other things over her. Most of the time, she wants to be number one priority. But you got to settle for number 8, 9, or 10. Worth it? It continues. Not the same old stories about single life. Black single women were targets of the same kinds of judgments familiar to so many others. Their sexuality was questioned, as was their maturity. They were asked to account for their single status, to explain what was supposedly wrong with them. If they had no kids, they were mocked. For example, do you know how to hold a baby? I ain't got a problem with that damn question. I'm going to just tell you. Having witnessed my son being born, I'm a damn sure interview anybody that wants to pick him up. I'm not going to assume you know how to hold a newborn baby's head just because you have breasts. I don't care who you are. Difficult as it was for us to have kids, please, you might get a written test from me before you can pick my son up. But anyway, that's beside the point. Let's continue. In other important ways, though, their experiences defy the standard cultural narratives. Examples include the advice they receive, the systems of support they create, and what they take from popular culture. Advice. Mormon notes that popular culture subjects single black women to all manner of advice about how to get a man. As for example, Steve Harvey's Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man. It says, but this type of advice was nearly absent from the current study. Rather, participants described receiving advice as girls and in adulthood, directing them to finish school work and establish financial security, all while avoiding men in relationships. Now, this is key. This is a feature, I would argue, at this point in African American culture. It is a feature in the culture that girls are told to postpone relationships so that they can secure, school work and financial security independent of men. And men are told basically that that's something that should happen. But one of the difficulties we have with that is we start thinking about marriage and I would argue it 33 and beyond, right? Which puts us into a dangerous zone as far as healthy child bearing and, being able to navigate relationships properly. I think there's actually a detriment to waiting this long to secure those things. By the time you come to a relationship, the willingness to share resources, I think it dramatically drops. I was much more willing to share when I was younger. When you get older and you've established your own and you run across somebody else, you tend to be a little more hesitant about doing that. Especially when it's taken you a long time to build something up. Many men know this. Right? You spend years building up your capacity, and you meet somebody that has the capacity to take half of it away because she's decided she's no longer happy. And I think this is something that more men have to be concerned about than women. I mean, there are women who have experienced family court not working in their favor, but that tends to be something men experience more so than women. So this whole idea of waiting until later, I think men get a little more, reserved about how much they're willing to put on the line, especially when you're dealing with somebody that's been taught that you're not a priority until she's tired and lonely enough to need you. Not a good recipe for a secure relationship. Let's continue. In their descriptions of the goals they were pursuing, the women showed that they were taking that advice seriously. They also reported giving similar advice to their friends and relatives and to younger girls in their lives. Now, this too is key. This too is key. When you're engaged in a relationship and you start to have problems or you start to have just, issues that come up, who does she go to for advice? I talk about the Black community being a gynoprotestal, having a gynoprotestal family structure, meaning that you have women in positions of authority and leadership in households, and from there advising each other how to maintain that authority in those households. But that authority also comes with a healthy dependence on the system to provide this type of, security, financial and otherwise, that promotes a sense of solipsism, that promotes a sense of superiority, and downplays the relevance of relationship, particularly with heterosexual men. So in other words, when there's a problem in the relationship, who she goes to, as this article is confirming, are other people who've been socialized like her, socialized to deprioritize relationships and men to a fairly low level. So when you have problems in your relationship, what kind of advice is she likely to get? There you go. Continued. Support systems. Terms like alone and unattached, as well as descriptions such as doesn't have anyone, are used interchangeably with single, as if having no one in your life is the definition of being single. In fact, though, single people are in many ways more connected to other people than married or coupled people are. Okay, you can sling that bullshit if you want to. But anyway, scholars in the Black feminist tradition have been documenting the robust social networks of Black women for decades. As for example, in Carol Stack's 1975 book, All Our Kin, Mormon too found stereotype-defying social connections among the Black women she studied. Friends, family, and ex-romantic partners played a critical role in the day-to-day lives of participants. Support varied and included assistance with money, support with chores in the home, help in times of illness, childcare, aid in times of crisis, and help with transportation. Understand what she just said, right? Friends, family, and ex-romantic partners. When I talk about gynoprotestal, I'm not only talking about women that are only in connection or primarily in connection with other women in their family who are also socialized to lead and financially and supported by the system to be able to be in that position. They're also connected to other gynoprotestal networks in the family, other families of women. Now, in those family structures, one of the resources that are bartered in support of one woman to another are men, sons, brothers, whomever, to provide protection, repair items, doesn't matter. This also includes ex-romantic partners. In other words, ex-boyfriends, right? This is how this network functions. In other words, when we talk about the independent woman, often what gets misconstrued, and Mormon is actually here kind of supporting what I'm saying, is that there really isn't an independent woman. What it is a social network that she relies upon. A network of family, a network of friends, a damn network of even having ex-boyfriends to provide the resources that make men replaceable, disposable, exchangeable. I used to call it in the 1990s when I was dating, insert man here. She already had a network. She already had a structure. I used to date women that would sit there and tell you, all I need a man to do is X, Y, and Z. In other words, come stand here, look good. I can take you to church. I can brag on the fact that I got you. But ultimately, just do what I say and don't say too much else. Don't have any demands or requirements that I need to work for because I just don't have the time. You're here to service me, not the other way around. Insert man here. That was it. And the frustration that came about from women that couldn't find men willing to play that role was, why can't I find a man to just shut up and do what I tell him to do and fit in my life the way I tell him to fit in? All you got to do is have six pack, have $100,000 or more, be over 6'2", and shut the hell up and do what I tell him to do. Have sex with me when I tell him to, how I want it, but don't ask me for sex when I don't feel like it. And you really just need to know when I don't feel like it. I don't want to even have to tell you. And if you can't figure it out, I might have to replace you. And by the way, take care of these kids that I've already had before I met you. And I might have had them from different sources. I mean, this kind of narrative is very popular. And I'm not talking just about the unlettered or those who are, on the lower level of economic. No, I'm talking about educated, well-to-do, degreed, over six-figure earning. There's the same kinds of roles in place in terms of how men are conceptualized. We're here for service. And even when you break up with her, there's still an expectation of service. That's what's being said here. She relies on a network. And here's an interesting thing. When you're dating a woman and she's trying to assess whether or not you have the financial means to be worthy of her time, she's not comparing you just to her paycheck. She's not even comparing you to other men's paychecks. She's comparing your resources to the resource network she already has. And you as an individual man need to be doing better than her network. And her network often includes government, as well as philanthropic structures. I posted another, I don't know if I'll, you know what, I'll bring it up right now. There was yet another example in New York of another program that provides only women with resources. DC, New York, San Francisco, Georgia, happening all over the country, right? Yet another example I was sent just today. There it is. Right? Some mothers are poised to get up to $1,000 per month through a new guaranteed income program. CNBC.com. Look that up if you want to. Okay? And what that basically does is it means that you now have to compete with all of these various institutions, formal and informal, to be worthy of her time. For the average everyday black man to compete with a network. See, that's an aspect of singlehood nobody talks about. Right? The unfair comparison of, or I should say competition that each man has to face, where you have to compete with her network. We talked last year about the welfare cliff and the degree to which women earning less than $30,000 actually have $65,000 worth of resources available to them. And the men that they entertain, if he doesn't make at least the $65,000 in resources she has access to, he's not considered a viable candidate for her time, even though she makes less than 30. Continuing, popular culture. Black single women are often caricatured as desperate for partnership, combative, or reproductively irresponsible. The women Mormon interviewed weren't buying it. Even those who wanted to find a long-term romantic partner were unwilling to compromise their life goals or safety to achieve that. Even those who wanted a lifetime romantic partner were unwilling to compromise. Well, what are they compromising? They're compromising, relinquishing the dependence on these multiple networks that more often than not men don't have access to. From high-level education to philanthropic donation, all of these kind of things that we're seeing, that's the reluctance she's really talking about. The reluctance of women to barter. And when she starts this sentence, this paragraph talking about black single women being caricatured as desperate for partnership, combative, or reproductively irresponsible, one of the things I talk about is this reliance and dependence on these institutions have promoted a set of behaviors that are rooted in narcissism and solipsism. And so the outward symptoms of it we see are desperate for partnership, combative, and reproductively irresponsible. Those are the outward symptoms. The deeper structure to it is how this type of one-sided framework that prioritizes and supports women and leaves black men out to their own devices is what promotes these kinds of symptoms that we see. The issues run deeper than that. But anyway, let's continue. Filled with infinite possibility, the 24 women Mormon interviewed described very different experiences of single life, but there were commonalities too. Taken together, their accounts supported this conclusion. Singlehood was complex and acted strategically, preferred over misogynistic partners and restrictive gender roles, and filled with infinite possibility. Collectively, these findings upend dominant notions of black women's singlehood as unwanted or evidence of dysfunction. So in other words, what's being said here is that they're celebrating this, or at least a population of it is. And she's theorizing this celebration, as this celebration of strength and independence. This complex, strategically enacted kind of dynamic, right? That was preferred over misogynistic partners and restrictive gender roles. See the dichotomy that's created here? You either have this glorious singlehood that's nuanced and enlightened and filled with energy and love and support, or you have this damn misogynistic, restrictive gender role. Those are the choices. This is why I call it a celebration. Because if that's how she's framing relationships, it's either this one great thing or this horrible, oppressive thing. Well, what are you going to choose? If those are the only two choices available to you, what are you going to choose? See, that's interesting to me. And it does not allow us to see other aspects of what this type of independence produces. I'm going to give you two very quick video examples. I posted these this morning, and I want to share them because I think they are relevant. All right, so let's start with this one first. Video that was sent to me this morning. Hold on. Go ahead and set this up in the chat. Hopefully you can hear the sound. All right. This is a video of a man who lives with his girl and he's breaking up with her. And so this is her response to that breakup. Let's check it out.
I'm saying, can I get my own shit? Man, look, what the that's stupid. That's dumb. I could get my own. No, you can't touch nothing in my mother house. See what I'm saying? You can't go in my room. How much? All this because the said he don't want to be with her no more, man. A said he don't want to be with her no more, and she just whatever. Just mad because the don't want to be with us. I'm oh man, she drove. See what I'm saying? Now you couldn't. Yeah, what is for you? What is for you? I don't give a. That's your money. What? Yeah, I bought it and I couldn't. I'm not doing it. Stupid ass man. No, you stupid. All right. Son, and like you ain't doing nothing. You want to get what the all I said was I didn't want to be with you. Now you want to cut the. You're good enough for the. Man, that's some dumb. Man, what the? Say, bro, can I get the rest of my things right? No, because you really. I'm not. See what I'm saying? Aggressor, it's her. It's Dawn, it's her. It's her. All right. Man, whatever, bro. You got a bag? You have a bag? Do you have a bag or something? Can I get a bag? 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 You can go ahead. Can I get a bag to put this in? Yeah, whatever. No, you can't get no bag. You can go ahead. Oh, bro. That's stupid. Wait a minute. Stupid. Right, you talking about who want to eat for what? Man, wait a minute. You cutting my hair too. Yeah, I'm cutting all this. That's very clear. You wasting my time. All the cause I said I didn't want to be with you, man. I said respectfully. Cause I said I didn't want to be with you. You want to be with Can I get a bag to put my shit in? Can I get a bag to put my things in? No. All right, man. See you petty shit you know. That's petty shit. You act like a little girl. You acting like a little girl. Yeah, you acting like a little girl. Look at this shit. You cutting tongues out my. No, don't put a beat on my shit. Don't put a. All right. That's childish. That's childish. That's childish. Yeah, whatever. Come on, man. That's the type of shit I gotta go do. That's the man. All right. That's stupid. You really bleaching my. You really bleaching my. Because I won't be with you. You know what I'm saying? That's down bad. All right, man. What that's doing for you, though, son? You act like that's giving you. Whatever, bro. That ain't you, man, because I want to be with you. You heard me? You drove because I want to be with you, son. Man, what the whatever, you know what? All you inner peace. All you about inner peace.
Okay. All right. So that's the first one. And basically what we're seeing there, right, is a woman that's decided that she's upset because he wants to leave. And now one of the things I think is particularly important, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier about the over-reliance of certain institutions. One of the institutions is the law, and knowing that she has the law working in her favor in terms of issues regarding abuse, right? Intimate partner violence. What did she say? Notice he touched me. Y'all saw that he touched me, right? In other words, letting it be known that she may be willing to apply charges against him simply because she's more likely to be believed, while he sits there and watches her destroy his property because she's upset. Now, mind you, these are the same single women that are celebrating, right? Singlehood. This is what I mean when I say it can produce narcissism and solipsism, the immaturity, the vileness, right? The pure, just evil, simply because her feelings were hurt. Now imagine the reverse. Imagine a man cutting up a woman's clothes, even if it's the stuff he bought her, pouring bleach all over it simply because he's mad that she chooses to break up with him. That would be a problem, especially if he's yelling at her and carrying sharp objects and then threatening to falsely charge her, low-key threatening her to do this. But these are the realities, right? But before you say, and I agree that men, I'm always a proponent of men, especially young men, having their own place. This is one of the reasons, right? This is one of the reasons, because do something she doesn't like, this might be the treatment, right? But before you say that's strictly how that goes, let's look at another situation that I posted on.
Shit, bro.
Let's check this out. So this is a situation where you have a young man that actually has his own place. And he did the same thing. He broke up with his girl. Let's see what happens.
This is what this girl did to my shit, bro. Look at this shit. Fuck. Hey, bro. Bro, do you see this, bro? Busted lip and everything, bro. Dog, all because I told her I ain't want to mess with her no more, bro. Don't come to my house banging on my door crazy. They ain't gonna do this to my house, bro. Cause she said I broke her heart. What type of shit is this, man? Look at this, eggs and shit, man.
Yeah. Right. So it's not just strictly a matter of having your own spot, even though I'm an advocate for that. But at the end of the day, it can happen either way. Well, we know he suffered at least intimate partner violence, at least one way. As he said, he had a busted lip, but then she destroyed his house. All because he wanted to break up with her. But this is the singlehood we're celebrating. This is the independence. That's what this is. I argue that what we're actually seeing is several decades of being socialized with a reliance or over-reliance on certain types of resources that are overly made available to women while held back from men. And again, this to me promotes a sense of superiority. But now it's reaching a point. Well, and the article did say this has been, they've been arguing, black feminists have been arguing this since the 80s anyway. But this kind of celebration of singlehood, you would think would come with some type of spiritual growth, maturity, emotional maturity. No. What it does foster is an entitlement. Entitlement to men solely on women's terms and the measurement of his value against her whims. And when he doesn't meet that standard, he can now become a part of her network of support until she replaces him entirely. As it said in the article earlier, she can even rely on ex-boyfriends. So even after breakups like this, those men still might get called to send her a couple of dollars because she's in a bad situation, help her fix her car, help her fix something around the house. Trust me, I've seen it and I've experienced it. And I've seen it from men who have gotten out of prison and they're trying to put their lives together. I've seen it from six-figure earning white-collar professional men who've had to deal with this type of behavior either way. And the women were all over the spectrum. Working class, underclass, upper middle class. Didn't matter. Same type of entitlement was at play. So, if this is what's celebrated as strategic singlehood, be careful, fellas. So y'all have a good one. I look forward to hearing from you in the comment sections. Peace.